Following the conclusion of the First War of the Diadochi and the post-war stabilization efforts, led by Antigonus in Asia Minor, it initially appeared that the Macedonian Empire was on course for a period of peace and prosperity. However, the death of Antipater in 319 BC brought an unexpected turn of events. With Antipater's passing, his regency was handed over to his lieutenant Polyperchon, rather than his son Cassander, which set the stage for inevitable conflict. Both Cassander and Polyperchon began to gather allies in a bid to eliminate one another and secure their positions as the sole regent of the empire. Cassander, who had few allies left in Pella, fled Macedonia and sought refuge in the court of Antigonus. He also secured support from Ptolemy, the new ruler of Egypt, who agreed to lend him assistance. On the other hand, Polyperchon forged an alliance with Eumenes, preparing for a confrontation with Cassander and Antigonus. Eumenes, who had been holed up in the fortress of Nora, had initially been in talks with Antipater. However, upon hearing of his death and the onset of the civil war, Eumenes seized the opportunity to slip away. Marching through the once stronghold of Cappadocia, he raised a small army and made his way to the royal treasury in Cilicia, where he utilized its funds to recruit additional mercenaries. He also garnered the loyalty of 6,000 of Alexander's veteran soldiers stationed in the province. In the spring of 317 BC, Eumenes and his forces marched to Phoenicia, where he assembled a naval force on behalf of Polyperchon. In Asia, at the beginning of 318 BC, Arrhidaeus, the governor of Hellespontine Phrygia, attempted to seize the city of Cyzicus. Antigonus, as strategos of Asia, interpreted this as a challenge to his authority and sent a force to counter Arrhidaeus. Meanwhile, Antigonus personally led an army into Lydia to confront the local governor, Clytus the White, who had managed to hold the province. Clytus ultimately fled to Macedonia, joining Polyperchon, who was marching southward to force the Greek cities to align with his cause against Cassander and Antigonus. Polyperchon, positioning himself as a defender of the freedom of the Greek city-states from Macedonian domination, encountered unexpected resistance. First, he marched to Athens in an attempt to seize the fortress of Munichia, but was thwarted by the timely arrival of Cassander with his naval forces. Polyperchon then moved south to Megalopolis, a city governed by Damis, who refused to submit to Polyperchon's rule. Damis likely rejected Polyperchon's claims of supporting democratic city-states, which led to a standoff. Polyperchon assembled a force of 24,000 infantry, 65 war elephants, and 1,000 cavalry, initiating a siege of Athens in the meantime. Upon arriving at Megalopolis, Polyperchon's forces laid siege to the city, deploying towers and sapper tunnels to breach its defenses. The local militia, numbering around 15,000 soldiers and led by Damis, managed to hold the attackers at bay for some time. Eventually, however, Polyperchon's forces broke through a section of the wall. In an overzealous display of confidence, Polyperchon ordered his troops to flood the city. However, the defenders swiftly detected the breach and sealed it with their spears. After suffering heavy losses, attackers were forced to retreat, and the defenders repaired the walls, setting up traps outside the city to prevent another attack. Polyperchon, enraged by the failure, called for the deployment of war elephants to break through the city's defenses. Damis allowed the elephants to advance into the makeshift breach, but had his forces place traps around the elephants. The defenders showered the elephants with arrows, causing them to panic and trample their own forces, throwing Polyperchon's troops into disarray. After failing again, Polyperchon retreated, The siege of Athens also ended in failure when Cassander's forces triumphed, securing the favor of the Athenians. Soon after, Antigonus decisively destroyed the fleet that Eumenes had raised for Polyperchon at the Battle of Byzantium. With his campaign thwarted, Polyperchon was forced to abandon his efforts and flee Macedonia. He found refuge in Epirus, where he joined forces with Olympias, the mother of Alexander the Great, Roxana, and the infant Alexander. Together they formed an alliance with King Aeacides of Epirus and launched an invasion into Macedonia. Initially, Olympias was successful, defeating one of Cassander's armies, which was under the leadership of the disabled Philip III. She had him murdered but was soon confronted by Cassander, who returned from the Peloponnesus, decisively defeating her forces. Olympias was executed in 316 BC, and Roxana, along with her son, was taken into Cassander's custody. Meanwhile, Antigonus had consolidated his hold over the satrapies he had captured and now focused his attention on Eumenes. Eumenes hastily withdrew from Phoenicia and marched eastward to rally support in the eastern provinces. His efforts were successful, with most of the eastern satraps joining his cause, which significantly strengthened his army. Eumenes led his newly expanded forces through Mesopotamia, Babylonia, Susiana, and Media, until the two armies finally met at Paraitacene. Antigonus's army, at full strength, consisted of 28,000 heavy infantry, 5,500 light infantry, 6,900 light cavalry, 3,700 heavy cavalry, and 65 war elephants. Eumenes, on the other hand, commanded 17,000 heavy infantry, 18,000 light infantry, 6,000 cavalry, and 125 war elephants. In terms of deployment, Eumenes placed his left flank under the command of Eudamos, with cavalry support, protected by a lancer vanguard. His center was made up of his heavy infantry, with the silver shields positioned on the right flank, supported by Eumenes himself and his remaining cavalry. The elephants and light infantry were deployed in alternating formations in front of the flanks. Antigonus deployed his light cavalry under Paethon on the left flank, with most of the elephants placed on the right flank alongside his son Demetrios, who commanded the elite Agema cavalry. Antigonus placed the rest of his elephants in the center and left flanks. Antigonus began by advancing his right flank, while holding his left flank in reserve due to its lighter armament. The terrain on the enemy's right flank was elevated, but Paethon was ordered to move forward, as this was the only portion of the battlefield where a flank attack could occur. Paethon used javelins and arrows to harass Eumenes' elephants, prompting Eumenes to order his light cavalry to emerge and counterattack. After a fierce skirmish, Eumenes' cavalry forced Paethon's troops to retreat, and a contingent of elephants followed, trapping them in the foothills. The battle raged on in the center, with both armies colliding in a fierce engagement. The Eumenes force had an advantage thanks to the experienced Silver Shields, who, despite their advanced age, were veterans of both Philip's and Alexander's campaigns. Their experience and skill helped break the Antigonid phalanx. However, Antigonus wasn't easily deterred and counterattacked with overwhelming force, eventually overcoming the Eumenes' left flank. Despite Antigonus's success on his own flank, Eumenes triumphed in the overall battle. Eumenes lost only 540 infantry, a few cavalry, and had 900 wounded, while Antigonus suffered heavier losses: 3,700 infantry killed, 54 cavalry, and 4,000 wounded. With his army's morale broken, Antigonus withdrew from the field after nightfall, and Eumenes retreated to his winter quarters, expecting no further challenges. Antigonus retreated into Media, while Eumenes moved to winter in Gabiene. Meanwhile, Antigonus concocted a plan to surprise Eumenes. He marched through the bitter winter of 316 BC, navigating harsh terrain and blizzard conditions. Somehow, Eumenes learned of this plan, quickly organizing his forces for a battle. The two armies clashed on the open fields of Gabiene. Antigonus's forces comprised 22,000 heavy infantry, 9,000 cavalry, and 65 war elephants. In contrast, Eumenes commanded 36,700 infantry, 6,000 cavalry, and 114 elephants. The vast, open plains provided ideal conditions for large-scale formation combat. Antigonus positioned Python with the cavalry on the left flank, while he and Demetrios took command of the right, leading their most elite troops. The center was occupied by cavalry, with the elephants deployed as a vanguard at the front. On the opposing side, Eumenes positioned himself on the left flank, directing the cavalry while placing the formidable silver shields beside him. The rest of his infantry extended along the line, with the elephants similarly spread out at the front. His right flank was reinforced with light cavalry and additional elephants for support. Eumenes initiated the battle by ordering his elephants in the left and center to advance, while he and his troops pushed forward behind them. The advancing beasts stirred up massive clouds of dust, reducing visibility and blinding his own cavalry. Antigonus quickly seized the opportunity, sending a contingent of his light cavalry through the cover of the dust storm. They bypassed the front lines and reached the baggage train of Eumenes' forces, swiftly seizing it. Meanwhile, Eumenes pressed into Antigonus's ranks, but his charge failed to break them. Piosestas, who had been part of the attack, lost confidence in their chances and withdrew with his troops, leaving Eumenes exposed to hold the line alone. At that moment, the silver shields arrived in force, advancing behind the elephants and smashing into Antigonus's infantry, shattering sections of their formation. The battlefield plunged into chaos, forcing both sides to pull back to their respective camps, ending the engagement in a stalemate. As night descended, Eumenes sought to rally his disheartened troops for the next day's battle. However, news of the stolen baggage train spread throughout the camp, igniting outrage among the soldiers. At this critical moment, the Silver Shields, who had long harbored distrust toward Eumenes due to his southern Greek origins rather than Macedonian heritage, rose in revolt. Upon discovering that Antigonus had seized their families, servants, and spoils of war, they secretly initiated negotiations with him. An agreement was swiftly reached. In exchange for the return of their baggage and loved ones, the Silver Shields would deliver Eumenes and pledge their allegiance to Antigonus. Without hesitation, they arrested Eumenes along with his senior officers and handed them over. Antigonus wasted no time. Eumenes was swiftly executed. With Eumenes' death, the war in the eastern provinces of the empire came to an end. Following the conflict, Cassander established his dominance over Macedonia, bordering the territories of Lysimachos in Thrace. Meanwhile, a vast domain encompassing Egypt, Cyrene, Syria, Libya, Cyprus, and several islands fell under Ptolemy's control. Antigonus, now ruling all of Persia and Asia Minor, emerged as the unrivaled power in Asia. His growing influence alarmed the other Diadochi, and within a year, the Third War of the Diadochi erupted.